Everyone, welcome to today's live stream. I want to follow up on the most common comment on yesterday's live stream, and that was that a lot of people don't have vets. And that is a really frustrating thing for goat owners. And it's also a really frustrating thing for anybody who tries to help goat owners. And not having a vet is a very subjective thing. Like, that sounds really black and white. Like, oh, there's no vet in my area. And I think the problem is that people expect to have a goat vet around the corner, just like they have a dog vet or a cat vet. And the fact is that most vets don't see large animals. And those that do, not all of them see goats. But just because you don't have a vet around the corner like you do for your dog doesn't mean that you have no access to vet care. And I think that's a really important distinction that needs to be made. I personally have been driving 2 hours to take my goats to the University of Illinois Vet Hospital since the local vet left in 2005. So I don't know how many years is that, 19 years? And so there's a lot of options. And, a lot of times people contact me and they say, I don't have a vet. And then they ask, should I give my goat this medication? And that's a prescription medication. And I'm like, okay, if you don't have access to a vet, how did you get that prescription medication? Oh, well, I got it from this vet an hour away. Okay, well, why don't you call that vet and ask them about this? You do have a vet. So most vets are happy to talk to you on the phone. The majority of them will talk to you on the phone and not even charge you. I have heard of a couple who charge people, but that is rare. The vets at the university hospitals will talk to you on the phone. The first time I called the university hospital, somebody else told me to do it. I had a goat that was dying, and it was when the vet had left our town, and I called my mentor and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And she said, take him to the university vet school. And so I called down there, and first they talked to me on the phone, and then it's like, yeah, you need to bring him in. And so then I drove 2 hours to take him in, and that's where I've been going ever since. And for a while, I did have a traveling vet who would come to my farm, but she was 2 hours away. So what we would do is that I had 3 other friends in the area at the time, 2 that had goats and 1 that had alpacas. And we would schedule stuff together because it was a $150 trip charge for this vet to drive 2 hours to our farm. So the 4 of us would schedule any kind of routine stuff together. Like when people bought kids for me, I would schedule all the health certificate appointments at this time so that we could, and the vet was willing to split that $150 trip charge between the 4 farms because we were all just a few miles apart. Unfortunately, those ladies have all moved down south to warmer places. And so I don't have that option anymore. So now if I call that vet, it will cost $150 just to have her pull in my driveway. So, and she has to drive 2 hours to get to me. So I'm back to getting in the car and taking the goats and driving them 2 hours to get to the University of Illinois Vet Hospital. And honestly, I am very spoiled by that. It is great because they have diagnostics right there in the hospital. So when they do any kind of a blood test or anything, we've got the answer within an hour or 2. Unlike if I did have a local vet, they would send it off and I wouldn't have an answer for a day or 2. So if you have a university vet hospital near you, that is so fantastic. You have such an amazing opportunity. And the other thing I love about it is that if you go during the day, if it's not an emergency in the middle of the night, which is great because they're open 24 hours a day, so you can take emergencies there. But what's really cool is that if you go during the day, there's usually a lot of students around, and so the professors are teaching. So you get to hear everything that the professor says about your goats. And he's like quizzing the students on, what should we do here? What should we do here? Should we use the local antibiotic or injectable antibiotic? And so I have learned a lot from taking my goats there and listening to the conversation between the vet professor and the students. And I am free to be able to ask questions and to learn even more. So it's really a fantastic option. There are 32 vet schools in the United States now, which is better. Back 15 years ago, it was only 26 or 27. And so we have even more vet schools now than we used to. So that would be one option for a lot of people. And the other thing too is that vet schools are not very expensive. The University of Illinois for large animals, it's much cheaper than local vets would be. So many years ago, I had a La Mancha buck that got in with my Nigerian does, and I gave Lutalice to every doe that had not been bred yet. And so one of the does that had not, that did not get the Lutalice because I had bred her, wound up her due date came and went. And I thought, oh my gosh, she wasn't pregnant when the La Mancha buck got in there. And so he got her pregnant. And she was enormous. Like her due date came, she was enormous already. And so I'm like, okay, why aren't you kidding? And then I thought, oh no, it's because you weren't actually pregnant when the La Mancha buck got in there and he got you pregnant. So you are huge because you're going to try to give birth to these ginormous babies. And so I called lots of vet clinics everywhere to get prices for C-sections. And the university at that time was $200 for a C-section, and another vet was $800. And so that's another thing too. If you say, somebody said in the comment section to yesterday's live stream, they said that a C-section is $10,000. Now, I teach for the University of Massachusetts. I teach a class in raising goats. And one of the assignments that all of my students have, and they are all over the United States and even other countries, and one of the assignments that they have is to find vet goats in their area. I have never had a student who could not find vet goats, and they are all over the United States. Sometimes they have to drive an hour to get to one, sometimes 2 hours, but usually there's one at an hour or less for all of these students who are in all sorts of parts of the United States. The only students I have ever had who have not had that are those who live in Alaska. So I have had students on the Aleutian Islands, so that's only reachable by a boat or a plane. And also I've had students in way up in Alaska where the vet comes in once a year in a helicopter. So, but this is the thing, okay? If you really don't have easy access to a vet, then you need to have an outstanding relationship with a vet. Because if you have a relationship with a vet, they will help you on the phone. They will help you from a distance. And if you haven't found that vet yet, then keep looking. I have tried other vets and I haven't continued to use them for things. And I also make an independent decision. Like 2 years ago, I had a doe that was in labor, and it was the weirdest labor ever. And I was trying to get the kids out and I couldn't get a kid out. There's like these 2 legs out forever. And I started thinking about, I'm like, all right, so she needs a vet. Who am I going to take her to? Do I call this? Because I'd heard there was a new local vet. So should I call the new local vet or should I drive the 2 hours to take her to the university? And I decided to drive the 2 hours to take her to the university. And I'm glad I did, because she would have died in a barn C-section because she had a really bad reaction to the anesthesia. So she had a C-section at the university, and she had 3 doctors there, the surgeon, an assistant to the surgeon, and then the vet who admitted us. And then there were 2 students who were monitoring her vitals. And if you have a barn C-section, it's usually like the vet and you're the assistant and that's it. But in this case, we had this team that was taking care of her. And one of the students was monitoring her vitals and knew when all her vitals were going south. And she told the surgeon and the attending vet, and they were immediately able to give her the medication. And they had everything that they needed, like her blood sugar plummeted, her blood sugar skyrocketed, wrong direction. Her blood pressure plummeted, and just everything went out of whack. And so they were able to give her the medication that she needed to try and get her back on track. And I even said to the surgeon, I was like, she never would have survived a barn C-section, would she? And she said, no, it got too complicated. And she had to have a C-section because the kid that she had was a schistosomus, and that the nickname for that is inside out kid. And it is pretty much what it sounds like. The kid looked like it had been folded in half, like the back end had been folded over the front end, and all the insides were on the outside of the body. So that was like this ginormous blob that never would have come out. So if you think that you can successfully raise goats on Facebook, like just getting advice on Facebook groups, is not going to happen. You at some point are going to need a vet for antibiotics and other prescription drugs. You're going to need a vet for diagnostics, and you're going to need a vet for procedures. If you raise goats long enough, you're going to have a C-section. We've had 750 kids, and we've had 3 C-sections. And one of them was because the goat didn't dilate, and the manual dilation failed. And that was when like the nose was like the nose was like sticking through the cervix, and there was no way to get the doe to dilate. And so she had a C-section. And the other one was a very small doe trying to give birth to a 5-pound kid. And that kid was never coming out. So other people also need to have C-sections for their goats. And I used to never talk about this. People have contacted me before about trying to do a C-section on a, like, kill the goat and cut the kid out. And like, that does not work. Okay. So, you know, if you have a goat that truly cannot give birth, you need a C-section, and you need a vet to do that. It would be animal abuse to try to cut open a live goat, which I have actually heard of that. When I was really new to this back in the early 2000s, there was somebody that got arrested for animal abuse because they cut open a live goat to do a C-section. And so that is really not an option. If you don't want to get a vet, that's a whole nother story. But there are a lot of options for finding a vet. And like I said, if you're in a rural area, it's even more important to have a relationship with a vet. If this vet, like I had this vet that was 2 hours away that I had a great relationship with when I had 3 other ladies to share the trip charge with for anything routine that we needed done. And so if I needed any kind of prescription medications or anything, like she had been on my farm and was willing to get those for me, because we would talk and stuff. So also diagnostics are incredibly important. Diagnosis, and like by asking somebody like, so what did your goat have when it was laying in the corner of the barn not moving? That's pretty much the first symptom of like anything and everything that could be wrong with a goat. Like if they're laying in the corner of the barn, it just means they're sick. And I've seen people proclaim all sorts of things just from that simple description. And there's absolutely no way to know what is wrong with that goat if that's all the information that you have. So I really urge everyone to have a relationship with a vet. When I say call your vet, and this is the thing, I don't know, maybe people don't have any experience with like calling a vet and talking to them on the phone about stuff, but I have probably called the University of Illinois twice as much as I've actually driven goats down there, because usually I'm on the phone with them for 15, 20 minutes discussing a problem before we make the decision to drive down there. And sometimes I don't drive down there. I have actually called before, and like way early, long time ago, talking about a goat in labor, and was told by the vet, sounds like she just needs more time. You just need to be patient and wait. because he had all the facts. We had a conversation where there was a lot of feedback, way more feedback than you can get in a Facebook conversation. So, and if, again, it's just a matter of like finding a good vet. There are vets that I used once. So, I like to try a vet for something routine. And then if that doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I go looking for another one. The very first vet I ever used when I got goats, the first 3 times I called him, he said, well, sounds like she's okay, but you could give her a shot of penicillin just to be sure. And then I'd call my mentor and she's like, oh, that's normal. She's fine. But he didn't raise goats. So, he didn't know what normal goat behavior was. And then the straw that really, so I quit calling him because I'm like, okay, I know what his answer is for everything. I got the penicillin dosage memorized at this point. And that was back when penicillin was still over the counter, which it is not anymore. So if you intervene in a birth and you need antibiotics, you're going to have to contact a vet to get those antibiotics so that your goat doesn't die from an infection if she gets an infection. So, and somebody said in the comments, there are some vets that always say, bring it in, even if just to run a fecal. Well, then you go find another vet. So that's what I did. The very first vet I ever had, after 3 phone calls and him saying to give a shot of penicillin when the goat was just acting like a goat. What really broke the straw that broke the camel's back was that he didn't use sterile technique at all. He would give, like when he disbudded, because I had him disbud my first baby goats and castrate and stuff, and he was giving them a sedative, he used the same needle and sticking it back in the bottle. He used the same needle for all of the goats. And when he did my CAE testing on my does, he used the same needle. And I was like, I'm not using this guy anymore. So I went looking for another one. So, there are options. In my University of Massachusetts class, like their grade is on the line and they find vets. So, and like I said, they're in all different parts of the United States. I've even had students in Alaska and Hawaii, and the students in Alaska have a vet that flies in, but they have a relationship with that vet. So if they need to get a hold of that vet in an emergency, they have a vet that they can call who is going to talk to them. So if you don't like the vet, and I've heard some awful stories where people had really bad experiences with vets, and it's like, okay, find another one. So, anyway, I think you meant we don't have any vets specializing in goats. So I can't comment on specific areas. All I can say is, to keep looking, because it could mean that you have to drive. You could mean you have to drive a distance. And that brings up the fact that you have time. So this is the thing. And this is one of the things that's frustrating about the panic that you see in Facebook groups and why people are screaming at you to intervene, because they think that the kids are going to die within minutes. And that is not true. So when I drove a doe 2 hours to the University of Illinois to get a C-section, they delivered 4 kids 6 hours after that doe first started pushing. And so this was the doe that had ringworm, which people are like, have you ever heard of ringworm? And I'm like, yes, I had a goat get a C-section from ringworm. So 4 kids were delivered by C-section 6 hours after she started pushing, because she was trying to push even though only the nose was sticking through the cervix, which also is like the only goat I've ever had that failed to dilate was one that had the perfect nose pressing on the cervix. So that's not, that's definitely a problem when a goat is doing that. So anyway, she had a C-section. And 3 of the 4 kids were born alive. And the one that was dead had been dead for so long that you could just rub the hair off the body. So that had been dead for several days. So there was no rush. Also, a doe is not just going to drop dead in labor. um, if she just suddenly dies in the middle of labor, it's because there was some other extenuating thing, like she had toxemia or she had hypocalcemia. And I've seen people think their goat was in labor when in reality she had toxemia. And so if they would have gone in and tried to dilate her cervix, they would have just tortured her to death. Like, she needed to be treated for toxemia. So thankfully, when they contacted me, we figured that out really quickly, and they contacted a vet. So that's the situation. Like, this is why you have to have a vet, and why it's just a matter of perspective. Like, no, you may not have one around the corner like you do for your dog, but you need to have one. And even if it takes you hours to get there, you can still at least say you can save the dough. In fact, I know somebody contacted me one time because her dough had been pushing for 2 hours and she had been pulling for 2 hours, and the kid was not coming out. And then I find out that the dough was like 9 or 10 months old. And so I said, how much does this dough weigh? Like, just pick her up and step on a scale with her. And this goat that was pregnant weighed like 27, 28 pounds. And so I immediately said, okay, there is no way that this goat is going to give birth to the kid. You have got to get her to a vet. Well, she didn't have a vet. So then she gets on the phone, she gets on Google and starts looking for vets, and she finds a vet. And that kid was born like 8 hours after the dough started pushing, and it was alive. So you can't say that the kids are going to die within minutes if you don't do something, because you just don't know that. And so to try and do something dangerous, like when it's obvious that a kid's not coming out, you got to go to the vet. So this is why it's better to have, like, to know what your best option is. And I always tell my students, what my students have to do at the university is that they have to actually get the prices for the vet clinics. Because if there is a vet, like, you will find different prices within an area. Somebody in the comments of yesterday's live stream said a C-section was $10,000 for a goat. That is just crazy. Okay, the C-section we had 2 years ago, the C-section itself was $250 at the University Vet Hospital, but then it was like another $500 to save her life when she reacted badly to the anesthesia. So the total bill was like $750. But our other 2 C-section bills, like, everything all added up was like $300 or $400. But I know that there are local vets who would charge $800. And knowing that if I go to the university, I know that I'm going to have a team of specialists that are doing the surgery on my goat. And then students are like checking the vitals and stuff and letting them know that. And so to drive 2 hours and get that versus paying paying twice as much or more to have a vet come to my farm with no assistant except me and my husband, and without any, maybe without even the drugs that they would need. Like, I don't want to take that risk. I would rather drive, 2 hours to get there, and know that it's going to be really good. So Rachel said, we had a C-section done on a doe for $250. Doe lived, kid lived, and doe kidded naturally the next year fine. Yay. Yeah. So our first doe that had a C-section also kidded again naturally the next year, just fine. The other 2 does that had a C-section were retired because one was older, like she wasn't actually even supposed to be pregnant. But a buck had apparently gotten into the dry doe pasture and got her pregnant. So anyway, if you are able, let me just look at the comments real quick. Yes, Rachel, I agree. Reusing a needle over and over is bad enough, but not keeping the bottle sterile or changing between goats is basically malpractice. Yes. I couldn't believe it when he was doing that because I was like, well, I don't think any of my goats have diseases, but what about like, if you do this all the time, then you've done this with other animals too. That really freaked me out. So, um, So anyway, Marty says first you have to find a vet that works on goats. Go back and watch this from the beginning, because I have a lot of suggestions for that. So like basically you have to get on Google and start calling. Um, and there are vets, but you may have to drive to get to them. I don't think anybody's ever told me that they had to drive more than 2 hours to get to a vet. Um, and then when I tell them I did it, like that's what I do all the time. That is my normal. I totally get that. I drive 2 hours to get to the university. So you know, so and then somebody else said they got a C-section and the doe died later, which can happen, especially if the goat has toxemia. Um, so So anyway, in the description for this, I put a link because Tammy, who helps me answer questions on Facebook, and I both use university vet hospitals. She uses Texas A&M, and I use the University of Illinois. So we did a podcast on utilizing university vet hospitals, and check that out if you need a vet, because that is a really great option for anybody that lives within driving distance of a vet hospital. So I hope this was helpful. And if you have any other questions, feel free to post in the comments section below and we'll get back to you. Bye for now.